Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Goldstein from Aviation Week. Thank you for joining our panel. I think we have a really exciting panel this morning. We're going to be discussing an important topic, which is infrastructure development for AAM. I think it's a topic that at times has been overlooked, so I think it's really valuable that we're going to be having this discussion today. I'm joined by some really excellent guest panelists. To my left is Joyce Abu Musa, the Deputy Director of International Development and the AAM Global Program Lead at Group ADP. Dr. Fedi Shabil is the CEO and founder of Vports. Corey Cousins is the CEO of Altaport. Clem Newton-Brown is the founder and CEO of Australian vertiport startup Skyports with a Z, not with an S. And Adam Slepian is the Chief Commercial Officer of Supernal. So before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to briefly talk a bit about some of the work that they've been doing on the infrastructure space. So Joyce, would you like to begin?
Sure, not easy to go first. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time and your interest to join this panel. Group ADP, as you may know, is the major airport operator of the Parisian airports and also an operator of a huge network of airports around the world. Our positioning for advanced air mobility is simple, is to build, invest, finance, and operate the future vertiports in the Paris region. We've announced yesterday, and some of you may have seen it passing or have assisted to the announcement yesterday, the network of vertiports in the Paris region for 2024. This is very exciting for us. It's such a huge achievement because we were the very first to be mobilized in the Paris region in 2018 to make that happen. So it's so rewarding to see it concretely materializing in the announcement of the network of the vertiport, but also the mobilization of all the stakeholders in the Paris region as such, but also our industrial partners, Volocopter, and all other partners in the ecosystem.
Great. Fedi?
Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. Vport is Canadian based in Quebec, actually infrastructure player. We do as well an operation control center, which is mainly and basically to connect with the airspace. We do airspace configuration, we do airspace integration. So we are in Quebec, we have a network of vertiport in Quebec. We have a corridor between the US and Canada, basically leveraging the cargo business between these two countries. We have the World Integrator Center in Dubai, which is an integrator center creating an ecosystem in Dubai South. We have a network in UAE covering basically the key emirates in the country, Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi. So we have a network there. We are in Europe, in Switzerland. Very soon we will announce India. And we work, we don't have like an UAM with which we have a specific or at least exclusive agreement. We are diagnostic, we work with everyone. So this is Vport.
Go ahead, Corey.
Corey Cousins with Altaport. Our focus is a little bit different than the other folks up here on the stage. We're focused on the digital infrastructure that will power this physical infrastructure. So an operating system for the vertiports, or as NASA has phrased it, the VAS, the Vertiport Automation System. So not only are we developing this automation system, this operating system, but also leveraging that to develop the network by bringing on existing locations, by bringing on some of those smaller, what will be, vertistops, helistops, heliports today, general aviation airports, leveraging our solution to bring them into this network that is ultimately being developed for eVTOL.
Clem Newton-Brown from Skyports Australia. Looking around here, seeing for the first time some of these amazing aircraft is just mind-blowing. So fantastic to be here. When I look at these aircraft, I see an amazing future, but the only way that these aircraft can fulfill their potential is if they've got new landing places outside of airports and helipads. So Skyports is about breaking the nexus between aviation and airports, and that's where we're probably a little different to others. There are three things that we're very focused on. The first is the regulatory, policy, political and community support for establishing new vertiports in new locations. And that's in Australia going well, and I think it's also going well in many other jurisdictions with the ASA and FAA also releasing draft guidelines for vertiports. The second thing we're doing is we're a collector of interest from the property industry. So we collect property addresses, property partners who want to be part of this ecosystem. Now, the property industry is very interested at the moment. They can sense there's something happening. It's taken them a long time, but they can sense it. But nobody wants to spend a huge amount of money. So the massive designs that we're all doing a few years ago with vertiports, they're not going to be built anytime soon. The property industry is looking for something that they can dip a toe in the water, be part of the ecosystem, but not spend a lot of money. And so this is the third thing which we're focusing on, and which something we released yesterday, which is a modular vertiport. So we're going to have a range of modular vertiports, which will be a plug and play. A property developer can say, we are interested in being part of this system, and they can choose one of the modular vertiports to be part of it.
Go ahead, Adam.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. Adam Slepian from Supernal. So as Supernal is an eVTOL OEM, but as part of Hyundai Motor Group, it's really in our DNA to be an infrastructure developer as well. So what we're doing is really taking a holistic approach as an OEM to make sure that, as everyone up here has said, that you have the necessary infrastructure to be able to fly from point A to point B in the future. So our planned EIS entry in service is in 2028. So we're really taking that holistic approach to work by, with, and through governmental regulators, city-level agencies, kind of a grassroots approach from an internal perspective, and putting our resources towards that to make sure that we can get it right, working with external partners like folks on this panel, right, to actually go out and develop the physical and the digital infrastructure. Very important, not just the physical vertiport asset, but to what Corey is working on. How do we bring that together? How do we integrate that in the airspace? How do we integrate that with the aircraft? How do we integrate that with ground mobility services and devices as well? So we can bring together this entire ecosystem, as we call it, to make sure that there is a really good, sound, safe, affordable operating model for the aircraft to fly in the future.
Great. Thank you for the explanation, everyone. So I want to start kind of big picture here. When we have the leading eVTOL companies, which are talking about entering service in 24 and 25. So are we behind the 8 ball in terms of infrastructure development? And what needs to be done to bridge the gap to make sure that this industry is ready to take off in just a couple of years' time? Joyce, would you like to begin?
Sure. As my colleagues here have mentioned it, advanced air mobility goes beyond the VTOL manufacturers that are all exposed here today. Infrastructure is a key brick to kick off this ecosystem. These VTOL manufacturers and these engines need infrastructure to take off and land, to recharge, to get maintained, and also to transport people from one place to another. As an airport operator, we immediately understood this, and we understood it 5 years ago. We understood that advanced air mobility might impact in unprecedented ways the way an airport operates and the way an airport's impact the connection between its premises and the city. And this is why we started since end of 2018, beginning of 2019, to explore this topic. But we were mostly convinced that the service that we will be launching in 2024 for the Olympic and Paralympic Games will be really not mature enough and not aligned with the development of the VTOL manufacturers. And that's normal, and that's okay. But we decided to take the risk. We decided to take the first step and start developing the infrastructure, start thinking of how our master plans as airports will develop, will grow to integrate this new mobility dynamic. And this is why we started looking at our 3 major airports, Charles de Gaulle Airport, Le Bourget Airport, where you're at today, Orly Airport, for those of you who knows this airport, at the southeast end of the city, but also at our network of 10 aerodromes in the Paris region. We were convinced that for this industry to kick off, we need to utilize what exists in terms of infrastructure assets. And this is, I think, our added value. This is why it was important for us to look at what we can reuse, what we can readapt in terms of what exists, either elongated phaetos or existing parking stands or existing buildings that we can reuse to kick off the 2024 service for multiple reasons. One, because we needed the service to be economically viable. In 2024, as you may know, we will be launching the service with Volocopter, with one OEM. this is not economically viable. This is why we're calling this commercial service a pre-commercial service, because we want to showcase to the world that this service is safe enough. It demonstrates use cases that are important enough and meaningful to the society. And 3, the infrastructure is there. But however, we didn't want to spend a lot of energy, but also a lot of money to build this infrastructure. This is why we readapted what existed. We built and complemented where we needed to complement in order to prepare and kick off the 5 vertiports in the Paris region, which are a vertiport in Charles de Gaulle, a vertiport at Le Bourget here, another vertiport at the only heliport the city of Paris has, the heliport at Issy-les-Moulineaux, a heliport at one of our aerodromes in the southwest end of Paris, next to the Versailles Gardens, the Saint-Cyr Airport, and the only vertiport that the city center of Paris will have, which is the Austerlitz vertiports. And the idea is to link all of these 5 sites in 3 routes, the routes that were announced yesterday.
Great.
Actually, to your question, Ben, which is more strategic perspective on the advanced air mobility business, based on our reach, international reach, because we're now basically in 4 continents. What we see right now is there is a kind of 3 streams moving in parallel right now in our industry. So all what is related to the eVTOL, electrical vertical takeoff and landing. Here are basically, as you know, 350 companies, 600 prototypes, a lot of money pouring in that industry. And the reason is very simple. If you see our history of the aviation is basically the same. Everywhere we start with the machine itself. It's nice, it's a good investment for many investors, and that the trend started already almost 10 years ago. The second basically streams is going on right now, which is the infrastructures part, which is companies trying to locate themselves, to position themselves in different cities based on the economic of that city, based on the macroeconomic of that city. We can see Dubai, we can see Paris, we can see Tokyo, you can see Sao Paulo. These are major cities, and it's very simple. If you can see the economic of the helicopters business of these cities, makes sense for economically and commercially to develop the advanced air mobility in this city. The third streams, which is another part of the industry, which is we don't talk about that much, which is the air traffic or the airspace configuration. How to integrate these machines within the existing framework of the airspace right now, which is extremely challenging, I can tell you. It's not easy to find the way to fly these machines within the existing framework. This part is not really developed right now. The reason is very simple as well, the history, the framework of our business. This part is operated today by IASA or NAV Canada in Canada or DANS, Air Navigation Service Provider. These people are still waiting, trying to see what could be the next. And the technology will enable that part to fly or at least to be structured. To your question, Ben, we see a lot of development first stream. Some operators, ADP, Vports, Skyports, are doing city by city. But the other part as well, the air traffic management integration, airspace configuration, I think this part needs to be considered. And I'm very confident very soon we will see a lot of players evolving in that regard.
Go ahead, Corey.
Are we behind? I think everybody up here would love to see us further along, but likewise would love to see the vehicles further along as well. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. We can't start building until it's clear what's going to be needed. And so we're in a bit of a waiting game, but there's a lot of prep that can be done. You mentioned Sao Paulo. There are plenty of regions that already have fantastic VTOL networks. Sao Paulo is a great example where tremendous value, time savings, et cetera, is achieved through VTOL aircraft. And there's no reason we can't be working with those networks today, working with that existing infrastructure to help them prepare for what's coming down the pipe, especially while we are waiting for more clarity on what exactly is going to be needed. And that's one of the things that we're focused on at Altaport.
If you'd have asked me this question a year or two ago, I would have said, yes, we've got a desperate need. Let's build these vertiport networks so they're ready. I've become a bit more relaxed about it now because I've realised that that investment isn't going to occur until we've actually had the acceptance of the aircraft, and we won't have the acceptance of the aircraft until they're flying. So I see the progression to be fairly a natural progression where the aircraft will start flying. They'll start flying mainly from existing aviation infrastructure. As you've pointed out in Paris, 4 of the 5 are existing heliports or airports, and that's how it will happen. And I think once these aircraft start flying, then we can actually get the community and the political buy-in for new locations. So I think the most important thing a vertiport company can do at the moment is to work on the preparatory stuff that you've spoken about, so you're ready to move with something. But at the moment, we don't know exactly what all these aircraft are going to require. So it is a bit of a waiting game. But the most important thing I think we can do is to engage with the property industry. So you've got the sites that will probably be suitable, that you know that they're interested. You've got options on the sites. And then the next step is to have a means to build the vertiport quickly. And this is why, over the course of the last 5 years, we've sort of arrived at the idea that big vertiports will be done by big companies such as airport owners. But the most useful thing that we can do as a vertiport company is to have a smaller modular system where property owners can get on board at a fixed price. They know what they're getting in for, and they can be built off-site and installed relatively quickly. So I've become a bit more relaxed about the need for infrastructure to be out there right now.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so thanks, Ben. I think the short answer is I think we are behind on it from an infrastructure perspective. I think it's a balancing act, though, right? You don't want to have a whole bunch of infrastructure out there, kind of like Corey said, where you have no aircraft in it, but you don't want a whole bunch of aircraft ready to go with no infrastructure. And developing one individual vertiport in an area, in a city, in any geography, can be done faster than an aircraft development program. But to get up to that point where you can break ground on developing it and actually putting it into practice, that takes time. And that's why, from a Supernal perspective, we're working on it right now. We don't plan on launching service for aircraft until 2028, about 5 years from now. But we're working on the infrastructure development aspect right now because we think it's going to take that much time to get it right and to be able to enter the market at the right time with the right overall product built into the ecosystem. And that's a challenge, right? You want to balance that out with the right level of investment, the right level of activity. But I think we do need to see a bit more of an increase in really starting to develop the standardization and interoperability across potentially OEMs with vertiport developers, providers, people that will also build out the digital infrastructure, whether it's airspace management or the work that Corey does at Altaport to automate that system and really start developing and prototyping. A good example is an activity that we worked with Urban Airport last year in the UK to actually go build out a prototype. It's not the final product, but a prototype vertiport that actually fully functions to see how can we do this? How can we get this right? Where could we put this? And on ground, we're working with different cities and developers and use case providers to already start to understand, well, where would we put that? So we can go start working with the city on zoning, commissioning, environmental planning. These are all things that will take time to get right, that hopefully when we develop that overall system, we can employ it much faster and much more efficiently, kind of that snowball effect and build it from city to city. So I do think we do need to ramp up the game as an industry on that to make sure that when the aircraft are ready, we're not behind on the infrastructure aspect.
Go ahead.
And building with what Adam mentioned, let me give you a real case right now. So we started the certification process of Dubai South, Vport Integrator Center in Dubai. And then we thought naively, actually, and that's why I'm sharing this with you guys, that I think having the site, discussing with the urban kind of the city planners, the owners of the area about the locations and locating basically based on the economy of the business case. But once we started the certification process, think about it right now, how the airspace should be, the configuration of the airspace to get this aircraft from one area to the other. One vertiport is not enough. We need a network of vertiport to make sense, to do transportation of goods. And this is extremely complicated because where to locate the other vertiport based on the airspace that we have to think of. Now, the other transportation mode that around, how these people and goods coming in and out from this vertiport. This is extremely complex process that many stakeholders have to be involved. Extremely well-vetted people, they do this for years in other area, in other transportation area. And then now we have to explain what it means vertiport. We have to explain what it means advanced air mobility. We have to explain what it means social acceptability, urban integration. These things for us are our business, day-to-day business. I can tell you for many others, it's an education process that we have to go through. We are not late. I think we are not advanced. I think we are really late in terms of locating and positioning this in the infrastructure part of the advanced air mobility. This is a real case, what we're living right now.
So I want to ask a question about regulations. What are the major obstacles to building out vertiports from a regulatory standpoint, and what could governments potentially do to make it easier to build them? Adam, would you like to start off?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's a big challenge, right? Because when you look at infrastructure development, that can be so different from, I'll use the U.S. for example, from state to state, city to city, right? The challenge is anything that touches the aviation aspect has to go through some level of certification. So I think focusing on developing out that standardization and operability, whether it's for, and across OEMs, quite frankly, not just from a Supernal perspective, to make this market launch is one thing. To make it scale, you have to create that standardization and operability, right? If you fly from one vertiport to another, the sensor package needs to be different on your aircraft. The communication package needs to be different on your aircraft. That becomes a really big operational challenge, but even bigger becomes a major challenge of how do you get the right equipage on the aircraft that's certified. If you do that across nation to nation, that's one thing, but city to city, that becomes much more, it's not a challenge that you can actually overcome, right? So focusing on that from a cost perspective and an operations perspective, right? So focusing on developing out standards that can be interoperable across different aircraft platforms and integrate to a seamless environment on the ground, I think is where we really need to put a lot of effort. But the burden is on the industry to go prove that out, right, to the regulators and be able to show that and do that through proof of concept.
Go ahead, Clem.
Yeah, my background is in politics and property planning and law, and so my interest is particularly in the regulatory side of things. And in Australia and around the world, the rules and regulations around setting up a new heliport are pretty well known, and they're difficult. It's very difficult to get approval for a new heliport, and that's all we've got to work on at the moment. Nowhere in the world has any city or jurisdiction laid out the definitive rules for a vertiport and how it's different to a heliport. And this is one of the problems we've got, is that we need regulators to look at these aircraft as being different to helicopters, and because they're different, we'll allow vertiports to be placed in places where you wouldn't allow a heliport. Now, to achieve that, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because we are trying to show that these are different to helicopters. Now, the primary difference being that they're quieter. Now, there's been a bit of information out there, there's some aircraft flying, but there's nothing out there definitively for the politicians and the regulators to actually say, well, you know what, this is different. I used to say they're going to be smaller. Looking at these aircraft, no way are they smaller than helicopters, so we can't claim that. So we're claiming more environmentally friendly, we're claiming that they're quieter, and that we're claiming that there's a democratization of use. So this will be something that everybody can use, it's not just for the wealthy few. And those things are going to come together, and we hope result in a new class of aviation infrastructure called a vertiport. And when that happens, and if it's easier to get than a heliport, then that's when we'll see the fine matrix of landing destinations, and that where we can see the hundreds of property partners that we've got who are rearing to go, we can activate their sites as vertiports.
In regards to ground infrastructure, it's not the regulations that cause me concern. The regulations are fairly straightforward. We've been building airports and heliports for a long time. And I'll speak specifically to the US. The regulations as to what those airports, what those heliports, and in the future what those vertiports need to look like is pretty straightforward and easy to comply with. The challenge, which Clem noted, is the local politics. Every state, every city has jurisdiction over what happens and how things look. Again, speaking specific to the US, and that's where the hoops are that you really have to jump through. An interesting example, San Francisco, a bit notorious as far as constraints on what you can develop there and when. But there is a helipad that was built on top of, in fact, the only active helipad in the city of San Francisco today, developed on top of a hospital there. And it took them over 10 years to work through the local political process to get that helipad built. Tens of millions of dollars spent soundproofing nearby homes, doing research, etc. Things that needed to be done, but that's really where the red tape is. The regulations, what that helipad needed to look like, how it needed to function was all straightforward. It was that that city red tape that had to be dealt with, and that's what causes me concern as far as our ability, everybody here on this panel, our ability to roll out infrastructure in the way that it needs to be.
There is ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization's related regulation, which is SARBs, like standards. Definitely ICAO will be involved, but not now, because for so far it's basically country by country. So each country they have their own jurisdiction in terms of regulation. The second level, or the second layers, is basically their country, so or Europe region. In UAE, for instance, or in Canada, so we have Transport Canada. They have the regulation. UAE, they have the GCA regulation, and we have to follow each country's regulation if you would like to deploy this type of infrastructure. The advanced air mobility will add another level in terms of regulation, which is the city level, specifically in the US, where they have a different setup or a different set of regulation related to the urban integration. We have the same thing in Canada, different countries, different perspectives. So there has the 3 layers, 3 levels, and depending on the country, where are we have to go through three of them, or maybe 1, or depending on where we are locating, basically. In UAE, for instance, or in Canada, UAE, they're a little bit advanced in terms of regulation. There is a regulation in terms of the vertiport certification, so we have to follow that. And then in Canada, we are still waiting for the regulation related to vertiport, if there is a need for certification, and we have to follow that. Is that a challenge, or it's a problem, or it's like something stopping this advanced air mobility to move? I think the industry is clear. The industry is putting a lot of pressure on the regulatory, at least framework, to move forward. Infrastructure side is easier than on the machine side. But for the infrastructure, I think we will have very soon kind of framework of regulation, at least in many or specific or in the important countries where this advanced mobility will move first and quickly.
Ben, I think because we understood that, as my colleague said, these engines, for them to be able to fly, they need to be accepted, and for them to be accepted, they need to fly. We took a major decision when we launched our roadmap in the Paris region, is to be able to test and onboard people to come and witness this technology, test and onboard the regulatory authorities to come and see and build this confidence with the VTOL manufacturers, and onboard the institutional stakeholders, the government and the Paris region, on this project. This is the decision we took in 2019, and this is what we managed to do by end of 2019. It took a lot of work with the civil aviation authorities in France, a lot of work as well on the institutional level. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy not because the industry is not ready. It wasn't easy not because it is an infrastructure challenge. It wasn't easy because there was no confidence. These are new engines. The regulatory stakeholders, their job is to protect their airspace, is to protect the people above which these engines will be flying. The institutional stakeholders, the government, the Paris region, their job is to offer new mobility services that are meaningful to the communities, not another mobility form that will only service the rich or who will be able to afford it. So that was for us a major acceptability challenge. It wasn't an infrastructure challenge. And because we understood it, we decided to set up a concrete experimental site. We picked one of our aerodromes in the Paris region. We've built out a 1-to-1 vertiport with a dedicated landing site, a dedicated taxi stand, a dedicated vertiport building, which we've collaborated on with Skyports, our partner. And we decided not only to do technical testing campaigns to prove the infrastructure and prove the vehicle design and prove the operation, but most importantly, an acceptability site. This is our concrete test bed where we invited communities living around our aerodromes, communities living around our airports, civil aviation authorities, the institutions, journalists, media that are against and for the project. It was pretty much impressive to see the acceptability curve since 2019. The number of articles that were against this project, and today the number of articles that are for the project. And this is not greenwashing. This is not telling the people that this is a new sustainable aviation, this is zero carbon emission. No, we're telling the people this is a new mobility form that will be meaningful to you. And this is why the challenge for us was working on meaningful use cases for the people and for the city of Paris. The culture in France and in Paris very specifically is a particular one in a sense that a new mobility form only for the rich wouldn't fly. So this is why we needed to focus and deep dive on what are the use cases that will be meaningful to the people. This is why we're working not only on transporting passengers and people from an airport to another, but also we are working on medical use cases across the routes that we've launched. This is why also we've signed a partnership with the hospitals of Paris, because we understood that it's not only the industry that's important, it's not only civil aviation authorities and the onboarding of the institutional stakeholders, but also other stakeholders that perhaps need this new mobility form to serve underserved areas and underserved regions in some cities and some countries. In every single testing campaign we've been doing in 2019, 2020, and I think some of you might have been invited throughout these past couple of years, it has been such a pleasure to witness the first OEM that will be running our service in 2024. Definitely it will not be the only one. Fly. It's important because people understood that when we say in PowerPoint presentations and in report and articles that these engines are 3 to 4 times less noisy than the helicopter, people heard, people understood, people felt. We were able to maintain a normal discussion when the velocity was just passing right through in front of us. And this is how we were able to onboard the regulatory stakeholders. They were confident that this new engine is safe. They were confident that this new engine will be certified in time. They understood that we will not be running autonomous service in 2024. And this is how we started collaborating together with the civil aviation authorities. And this is why the French civil aviation authorities are the first regulatory authorities in the world that have adapted their regulatory framework for heliports and that basically set up the heliport as adaptable to VTOL operation. This is a first, and it's a first because we proved to them that these engines are safe to operate.
So I want to talk a bit specifically about urban air mobility. We all know the vision of UAM having eVTOLs take off and land from the tops of buildings, parking garages, high-rises, hospitals, etc. But how realistic, is this in the near term? What are the major obstacles to developing vertiports, specifically in urban locations? And what kind of businesses and properties, could be ideal to potentially co-locate a vertiport at? So Joyce, would you like to kick this one off?
Sure. That's an easy question when we are 400 days away from the Olympics and we're running the first network of vertiports. I think there are a lot of prerequisites, but a lot also of criteria that helped us pick the 5 sites that we've announced. One is mainly their aerial environment. The sheer fact that, as I mentioned, 4 of the 5 sites in Paris will be set in existing airports and existing aerodromes were a major challenge. Many of the people think that having a vertiport in an airport is easier than having an airport in an urban context. It's not the case because airports are complex as such. Operations and existing infrastructure challenges are already a major challenge for the advanced air mobility industry and the infrastructure. So we adopted a matrix that helped us pick the sites within each and every single airport, but also a socioeconomic analysis that helped us pick all the 5 sites in Paris. Definitely the network we are running in 2024 will be densified with 5 more other sites in the Paris region towards the scale-up of the service in 2030, and this is when definitely all different VTOL manufacturers will come to the Paris region, will be certified definitely, and will come to the Paris region to operate. We'll start with Volocopter, but we'll be open to other VTOL manufacturers as they come. This is why one of the first basic approaches to our infrastructure modeling is being agnostic, meaning our vertiports are not only adapted to the velocity, they were also adapted to the likes of Lilium, to the likes of Joby, the Archer, the Vertical, the Airbus, the Ascendance like of VTOL manufacturers. And that was important in terms of how you dimension and how you plan the infrastructure. The second thing, and as I said in the beginning, it was important for us to pick up sites that had existing infrastructure, where we had basic components that we can reuse, like elongated FATOs, like existing taxi stand, and perhaps, and sometimes, existing passenger operation facilities, like in the Bourget, where we're using the FBOs, the existing FBOs for the operations in 2024. That helped us be more efficient on the planning, but also be more efficient in terms of business modeling in 2024.
Vport, we don't believe, actually we don't have a business case for urban advanced air mobility until by 2030. So we are basically based our business case on the regional advanced air mobility. So for instance, either in Dubai or in Canada, we are avoiding downtown. We don't build our vertiport to tackle the urban advanced air mobility. We are targeting regional advanced air mobility. We are targeting cargo, specifically cargo. The corridor between the US and Canada is for cargo. We don't do this for people for now. And of course, the other ways to maybe compromising the social acceptability and the integration of the advanced air mobility, which is the health-related advanced air mobility, or any other ways where we can engage with the community in that regard. So our business case is regional and cargo. The other thing, we don't believe in Vport that the business case for helipads or for helicopters business is aligned with the advanced air mobility using eVTOLs. It's a starting point. It's a good starting point to engage discussions with the regulators, with the key stakeholders, yes. But when it comes to the real business case, when it comes to the economic impact, the business case for helicopters is completely different than the business case for advanced air mobility. So we start with the same network, maybe the first couple of years, but again, when I'm explaining this to the regulator, I'm saying the same thing. We are just trying to compromise. We're just trying to make you comfortable to start discussing with us. We use the same airspace configuration if you want, the same area if that make you comfortable, if make you sleep. But at some point you have to be ready to see a completely different business case when we deploy vertiport in different regions.
You asked how realistic the dream of urban air mobility, rooftop-to-rooftop transportation is. Well, the interesting thing is that to a pretty meaningful extent, this has existed in the past and still exists today. In the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, to some extent in the US, you had New York Airways, I think the name was, flying 24 flights a day between the Trans Am building right next to Grand Central Station downtown to the Trans Am terminal. I think it was at Newark, if I remember correctly. It must have been JFK, actually. You had to arrive arrive at the building downtown 40 minutes before your flight departed from JFK, which is absolutely incredible, right? That's what we all dream of, what we're all trying to build here. 24 flights a day. In San Francisco, similarly, you had about 360,000 passengers moving a year by helicopter to 6 or 8 points around the Bay Area, including taking passengers straight to their terminal in San Francisco. Obviously, some hurdles. Things have changed in the aviation world since then. But it's existed before, and even in places like Sao Paulo and otherwise, it continues to exist today. So is it possible? Will that come to fruition? Yes. Will it be the very first use case? Maybe not. There's some hurdles that have to be overcome. But really, the value unlock is going to be proliferation of landing locations. The aircraft, obviously, none of this happens without the aircraft, but the value unlock is the landing locations. And getting those as close as possible to your start and end destinations. We've done lots of tests of this service or of services similar to this, and what always kills it is that travel from your origin to where your aircraft is going to take off, and then on the other end of the trip, where your aircraft lands to your destination. And when you introduce multimodality and the disruption from having to get out of the car, run to catch your flight, the stress that causes over a relatively short travel distance, a relatively short travel ribbon, that really kills the value. And so the key unlock, again, is going to be proliferation of those landing locations.
Look, Skyports has got options on most of the car parking garages in urban Australia, which I thought was a massive advantage when we got that through a number of deals. I'm less excited about the getting into central sites in central urban locations, because I can see how difficult it's going to be. Looking at the draft guidelines released by FAA, EASA, CASA, I think it's going to be very difficult to actually get approval for many sites in central city locations. There's just too many obstacles. I'm not an aviator, but looking at what I've seen and speaking with people who are aviators, I think it is going to be very difficult to get these central city landing sites, even on top of car parking garages, which are designed for aircraft or designed for vehicles, and are generally built built to, for purpose in places where people want to go, because car parking garages are generally built in places where people want to come to. So in that sense, they are well located. I agree with Betty. I think the best value for these aircraft is going to be longer distances rather than jumping around on city rooftops. Certainly in Australia, we're not congested enough to justify going within a city from one part of the city to another. So I think that I think it will come. There will be some sites that get approved in central city locations, but they're more likely to be sites that governments facilitate on government-owned land, because obviously the land is more expensive in the cities as well. So government-owned land, for example, on top of train stations where you're likely to have the clear air where you may be able to get aircraft in and out. I think they're likely to be the inner city locations. For the privately owned vertiports, which is the focus of our business, I think city fringe is going to be interesting, so you get quite close to where you want to go. You've got the space, so this is why industrial and commercial property partners are we're very interested in them, because we can get close to where we want to go, and the aviation aspects are easier. The other aspect, I think, which is going to be really important, which is why we're developing a floating modular vertiport, is that I think rivers are going to provide a huge opportunity, and perhaps the only opportunity for getting into dense city locations. Most big cities around the world are built on rivers or coastlines, and I think that presents a huge opportunity for new vertiports, rather than trying to shoehorn them into an existing urban fabric.
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on something that Corey said, is the word value. This is all about how do you create value from a customer-centric perspective. If you have the greatest aircraft in the world and you have a vertiport that you can operate, but it's not where people want to go, doesn't matter. Doesn't close the business model, right? Doesn't provide value to that customer, doesn't provide value to that operator, right? I do think from an urban air mobility perspective, this will come in many different forms in many different locations, but there's two ways that we kind of look at it. One is there's an experience aspect of being able to take a flight in a safe, affordable manner. But that's not necessarily a very scalable thing. Think of the tourism option. That's a great way to start, but it's not necessarily scalable. Kind of what people generally think of as the air taxi model starts to become scalable, but you've got to get people, to Corey's point, as close as you can from their origin to their destination, planning for all of the time that it takes in between to get there on the ground, how quickly you can get through the vertiport. So hopefully it's about 2 minutes to get through the vertiport, and you're on your flight going to your next destination via the aircraft. Right, I think that's going to be really, really key in identifying where those pieces are, and we're doing a lot of work to kind of model that out and understand. Also working with city agencies to understand where can you actually make that happen. That's going to be key to a driver to make this a scalable aspect in the future. That's going to take time, though, right? And it's the ability to scale that out, bringing down the right price points as well, so you can capture and provide that service to more of the market is going to be very important.
So,
Ben, perhaps
go ahead. Yes.
Before you move on to the last question, I think we're running out of time to complement what has been said. When we started working on this in the Paris region, all the VTOL manufacturers asked us to develop landing sites in the city center of Paris. It took them time to understand that Paris, as such, is one of the most dense cities in terms of the public transportation offering. It is the fourth most dense city in terms of the public transportation offering. We manage 40 million passengers per day throughout our public network. It took them time to understand that urban air mobility will not add value. This is the same value we're talking about. It won't add value. It won't gain time for the passengers that will be taking this VTOL service. And it doesn't make any sense to have multiple sites inside of the city of Paris. And this is why the fifth site we're having in Paris is mainly a floating site across the river. As Clem has said, the river is a high potential space for this new kind of mobility, and it is at the fringe of the city. Because we understood that, one, as you may know, Paris is a no-fly zone. The beautiful roofscape of Paris is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Nothing flies in and out except for the national health and the defense helicopters. So it's already a challenge to come in and out, even using eVTOLs, even the decarbonized form of aviation. So this is why we picked up this site. And it's important for everyone to understand, as my colleagues here said, when we talk about urban mobility, it doesn't mean that we have 10 sites or 20 vertiports inside of a city center. We need to look at the use cases that these vertiports will serve and the value and the experience these vertiports and these VTOLs will serve before mainly start to densify the network inside of a city center.
We have an audience question about operating vertiports located at airports. What considerations come into play, for vertiports that are located at airports, and what challenges potentially could there be? And anybody can jump in who wants to take this one.
We gave our example in UAE. It's extremely complicated to locate a vertiport within the airport. You will face 3 key big no from the air navigation service provider people that will be objecting to this, because this area of the airport, they are extremely busy with their own business, and you add another level of vertiport moving around or eVTOL moving around is extremely complicated. The second thing, the operator of the airport, they have already a lot of challenge related to the ground transportation, getting taxi in and out, getting people in and out. And you add a vertiport around that is another level that creates complexity. Us, people, getting in and outside from the airport is already challenging in terms of traffic, in terms of the in and out of the area. It's a challenge. So around the airport, Vport try to avoid that. We don't have anything close to the airport, or at least connecting to the airport. We will try not to get there for now. That's why really our business case is around regional, so basically avoiding the airport altogether. We're really trying very hard, even if the demand from many kind of stakeholders come to the airport, because it looks like in many mindsets the link is there, but you don't see the business case that could really develop that business, that make it easy for many stakeholders to engage within the airport.
Our position in the U.S. is a little bit different. We have an incredible general aviation airport infrastructure. 20,000 landing locations around the country. Maybe 5,000 of those are realistic, meaningful landing locations that could be a part of a landing infrastructure network. These GA airports are easy to get in and out of. They're close to population centers. The stat is something like 90% of the U.S. population lives within 20 minutes of one of these GA airports. So we actually see them as a great asset for advanced air mobility. And we try not to differentiate between vertiports and these GA airports. Vertiports are, it's not that we don't differentiate, but we don't exclude. They're not mutually exclusive, right? Vertiports aren't the only place that an eVTOL can or should be landing. They absolutely should be landing at this existing infrastructure. Now, as you look at the larger commercial airports, certainly there are some challenges. Airspace gets a little bit more hectic, but helicopters come and go from those airports all the time. Private aircraft, again, specific to the US, come and go from them all the time, flying in and out of FBOs. So we see them as promising locations, certainly with some challenges. The key unlock there will be specific to commercial airports, finding a way to connect the service, right? So how do you get that person to the sterile zone to drive that efficiency and the transfer of operations?
Yeah, I think we probably need to look at it a little differently. That vertiports aren't, I think they need to be providing a service to deliver people to airports, but they shouldn't be seen as part of the airport. They should be seen as part of the options of getting other terrestrial transport to get to the airport. So they're like a bus stop or a tram stop or train stop located outside of the airport. And I think we've got to get around the mindset, I said before, breaking the nexus between aviation and airports. This is the key to this. We need people to see these not as another form of helicopter, another form of aircraft, as another form of transport which provides some level of, or a similar level of amenity that buses and trams and trains do. So, from an aviation perspective, I can see there's obviously issues with conflicts with slow-moving vertical takeoff landing aircraft. So I presume the the solution to that, and there'll be people who know the answer to this, but I presume the solution to that would be have very specific paths to come in and out of airports. But I don't think they should be considered as part of the airport. They should be considered as part of the other terrestrial transport options to get to the airport.
So,
And
Joyce, maybe you could close out.
as an airport operator,
Yes, yes, please.
I can close the answers to this question. It's interesting to see the perspective of my colleagues, and this is why basically our job as an airport operator pushes us to understand and master the way our airports work. And this is why we're convinced that advanced air mobility is not a substitution for helicopter operation. It comes and complements our mobility offerings. We are pretty much well connected by train, by car, and also the advanced air mobility will come and add another layer, another service that we will come and offer to our passengers. Our take on that is that vertiports will be integrated in airports. One of the first viable use cases of the industry is the airport city link. We will start there. Perhaps we are wrong about our assumptions, and this is what we'll know and understand in 2024. And this is the good thing of taking risks and starting first. You learn fast, and it's okay if we fail. It's okay if our assumptions are not right. But to answer more concretely the question that has been asked, we look at a matrix of really 5 major topics, themes. One is airspace. The approaches is really important. We want to integrate advanced air mobility without disrupting the approaches of the existing aviation forms on our airports and aerodromes. Second, we look at infrastructure that's available. Again, it's very challenging to find spots that are available for advanced air mobility where no project is planned on airports. You know, airports, they review their master plan every 5 years, 10 years. We are getting ready to accommodate sustainable aviation fuel. We are getting ready to accommodate the hydrogen airport. These are all surfaces and parcels that needs to be dedicated in the master plan. And advanced air mobility is one of them. So the challenge is bigger, definitely, and the infrastructure and the availability of land is one of the key topics we looked at. Third, we look at acceptability. You know that airports are major sites that can, at one point in time, push for some people or communities around it not to be happy about airplanes coming in and out. So we really look at what's happening around Charles de Gaulle, around Le Bourget, around the aerodromes, and all the sites where we're launching the vertiports. And it's important for us to pick the site in a way that's the most far away from the dense surfaces or areas around the airport. Fourth, we look at accessibility. That was acceptability. Accessibility, the way people will reach these vertiports. These vertiports will be either landside or airside. The way they're going to be reaching them in public transportation, in cars, or in other forms of mobility. And definitely we look at attractivity, if there are any major projects that are developing around the airport that might attract the people even more to our platform. So basically these are the 5 factors we look at, and the base based on which we've selected the sites in our aerodromes and airports.
Great. Well, very interesting conversation. Unfortunately, we do have to end here because we are over time. But a round of applause for our panelists, please.